War, and it's always nice when members of our own shul can contribute heavily to the topic. In this case, it's Ruth and David, not necessarily in that order. I'm going to introduce Rabbi Milevsky, who's going to sort of kick off the program this evening, followed by David and Ruth. There's lots of refreshments. Please help yourself. If you're going to walk up, it's probably easier to walk around, but please help yourself. We are taping, so be careful what you say. It's going on posterity, and it's going to be on, hopefully, on the shul website. And I just want to remind everyone, we do have another program coming up. I think it's a week tomorrow. It's Military Ethics in a Jewish Army with Rabbi Shmuel Hirschler. It'll be on a Monday evening, and it's going to be sponsored by B'nai Torah, the YU Kola, and Mizrahi. As with all our programs, if you're interested in sponsoring the program in memory of someone or in honor of someone, or just because you want to sponsor something, please see me. We will be publishing, hopefully within about a week, our entire lineup for the next few months. And again, if you see a program in there that you have an affinity to and you'd like to sponsor it by your family, please give me a call. And so without any further ado, Rabbi Milevsky with the pointer.
I was offered it, I can't decline. Okay, good evening. The truth is, to have a get-together to talk about the Yom Kippur War is always going to be difficult. The reality is it was a painful moment in our history. It's important to remember, as we are going to be hearing about, indeed, miracles. Let's not forget the many Kedoshim who gave their life, Al Kedushas Ha'am Ve'aretz. So we have to be mindful of the loss, the pain of the family members. It is one that is difficult for us to really relate to because the pain is so deep. But nevertheless, may we be inspired to do for Am Yisrael as the Kedoshim did. We have to remember, I was asked to give a brief historical introduction. So one thing I do know that there was a system the state of Israel had to defend itself before the 73, before the Yom Kippur War. The reality is that the countries that surround Israel, that at that time had an agenda to destroy the Jewish state, had soldiers, had a regular army that was about 10 times the size of the Israeli army, of the regulars. And even the Israeli army understood very well that you cannot survive an attack if you are going to be outnumbered 10 to 1. But this is information that is well known, that the basis for their defense was the 48 hours, that if the country has 48 hours to call up the reserves, so then suddenly the ratio is only 1 to 3, meaning for every one Israeli soldier, you're going to have 3 Egyptians or Syrians, and that already they felt they could deal with. That was the reality. So, unfortunately, there was a tremendous amount we could call confidence, and that's a kind word, that the Israelis had, and the head of the military intelligence, Moshe Dayan himself as well, they had great confidence that there is no way the Arabs are going to attack, that the Egyptians are going to attack, that the Syrians are going to attack, and they ignored facts that were on the ground. When I mean facts on the ground, I remember once watching an interview of an Israeli soldier sitting by the Suez Canal with binoculars, and he was watching movements a few days leading to Yom Kippur, and he calls his superiors, and they say, "Don't bother us, we're not, okay, we know about the movement, it's just a targil, it's just some kind of training process that they're going through." He calls back a few minutes later, he says, "Ra'iti til, I've seen missiles there." So the headquarters say to him, "Chabubchik, young man, me'efo ata, where are you from?" He says, Mirushalayim. He says, Ata Mirushalayim. Birushalayim yesh tilim. Are there missiles in Yerushalayim? No. So how do you know how a missile looks? And they put the phone down. In other words, the Israelis were confident nothing, the Arabs will never attack, under the well-known statements of Moshe Dayan, that if we are dealing with policy that the Arabs give us, that the Egyptians and the Syrians give us, vis-a-vis guns, we could deal with their guns more than their policies. This was an attitude that existed. And this all came collapsing down. Already early in the morning of Yom Kippur, the government knew that there's going to be an attack. They thought it was going to be at 6 p.m. But the way the government officials, including Moshe Dayan, found out that there is an attack was when the sirens went off a few minutes to 2 p.m. on Yom Kippur. Dayan, who was up in the clouds throughout the world since the Six-Day War, had the greatest fall, and therefore there are statements, well-known statements. He labeled the situation a Churban Bayit Shlishi. There are now historians who claim that he was even considering the option of nuclear weapons. He was in complete panic mode. Not everyone was like that, but he had a tremendous downfall. And the reality is, what we do have to keep in mind, the loss was painful. The events to the pride of the people of Israel was overwhelming. Let's not forget the fact of there were indeed many, many tremendous Jewish heroes. We must remember Arik Sharon for what he achieved, that in essence he surrounded the Egyptian Third Army, and Sadat, with all his pride, was in complete panic mode towards the end of the war. Complete panic mode. He was, in essence, it was the mercy of a good Jew like Kissinger that saved him. And that was the situation with Sadat. Let's not forget that fact. Let's not forget the heroes in the Golan, like Avigdor Kahalani, who, due to their ability to be facing dozens and dozens of Assyrian tanks, they still had the courage and the determination to protect the people of Israel. We had great heroes. We are inspired by them. And let's not forget the gift from above. There's a Ribono Shel Olam that protects Israel and performs miracles, not just in the Six-Day War, but even after our mistakes that led to the Yom Kippur War. Hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. So next time you hear the news and you follow it and you feel a little bit of a panic mode about what's happening in the Middle East, remember that there is someone up there that is watching us. But now we're going to have the privilege, the honor of hearing from our heroes, people that served our country, people that felt it firsthand. So therefore I would like to ask the Cymermans to come up and begin what I believe will be something indeed moving. So we do thank you.
Thank you. I'm not a hero and I'm not
Yes, you are.
anything of the sort.
We'll take a book later.
Okay. By way of introduction, I just want to give, just very quickly, a historical record. In May '67, Abdul Nasser closed he asked the United Nations troops to leave Sinai. He moved troops into Sharm el-Sheikh with the declared intention of closing it off and shutting off Eilat. That was the immediate trigger for the Six-Day War, 1967. After 1967 war, Israel captured the whole of Sinai, and they set up a front line here on the east bank of the canal. That is the immediate history. On the 6th of October 1973, Sadat decided to change that. So this is our personal story. We went on Aliyah, we got married in '67, we went on Aliyah from England in '68. At the end of '72, we received formal citizenship, and in May 1973, I was called for basic training. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to give you some idea of the type of unit I was in, I will describe just one part of basic training. In basic training, one of the things you do is you do night firing. The idea behind this is that your company of 120 men goes out, there are a line of 10 targets lined up, And what is supposed to happen is that the first 10 people go forward, you fire your weapon, you put down the weapon, you go and check the target, and then you come back, and then the next 10 come forward. So our unit, which was composed of New Orleans, some brilliant minds, professionals, people who went on to become the leaders of industry, but as an army unit, So we go out for night firing. The first 10 men go forward, take aim, fire. You're supposed to put down your weapon, go and check the target. Some people remember to put down the weapon, some people don't remember to put down the weapon. Go and check the target. Come back. Meanwhile, the next 10 have come forward. They're not supposed to do that yet because the first 10 are still out there. The next 10 come forward with loaded weapons. The 10 coming back see this and panic. The officer, who's carefully counting, sees that there's only 9 people. The 10th guy, who decided that he needed to see to his personal needs, wanted a bit of privacy, so where would you go? He went behind the target. The 9 are coming back, the 10 are coming forward. The 9 are panicked, the officer is screaming, no, no, no. And the other 9 are all shouting, no, no, no. And I forgot to mention, of course, what happens is, because it's at night, the only light is from 2 flares at the either end of the target. So those are the first things that are hit in the first round. They go out. So nobody can see anything. And there are people milling about, screaming. And the guy comes out from behind the target, and he sees the other 10. And everybody's screaming. The officer's screaming, no, no, and they don't know what to do. No, what? No this, no that. That was our unit. Anyway, after it was all over, we came home in June '73, and they said to us, "Okay, we'll see you in a year's time for Miluim. You'll do Miluim," and that was where we were. Erev Yom Kippur.
Okay, fast forward to Yom Kippur. I was first thing I realized that something was amiss. Yom Kippur morning, it was about 11 o'clock, and I thought, very strange, I can hear planes in the air. And I looked out the window, and I saw cars on the street. And there used to be cars on the street on Shabbat, but Yom Kippur, nothing. And I thought, something must be going on, but I was a new Israeli, what did I know? And at that time, I had two little boys. Menachem was 3 years and 8 months, and Amichai was about 21 months, and I was 8 months pregnant. So I didn't expect to go to shul too much, but I thought, oh well, I'll just go along for a few minutes to get a Yom Kippur atmosphere. And I got the kids ready, I went downstairs, and I'm halfway down, and I see my neighbors, Havra and Chaim, and he's in uniform, army uniform, and they're looking very somber. You know, what's up? And he says, well, I've just had an emergency call-up. And we went downstairs. I can't begin to tell you how it felt to see my friend, neighbor, Chaim, with his kippah sruga, getting into a car and driving off on Yom Kippur. Anyway, I commiserated with my neighbor a bit. Another neighbor came up on a motorcycle. She'd just taken somebody off to his base. And we didn't know what was going on. And thoughts of shul were forgotten, and I commiserated. We stood around, guessing. Rumors came. I went upstairs, put the kids down for a nap, and I davened with such kavanah, you can't believe. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I thought I heard a radio come on. I thought, oh, this must be really bad, because there was no broadcast Yom Kippur. I still didn't know anything really, and about half an hour before Yom Kippur went out, there's an air raid siren, which is the scariest sound to hear. And rushed down to the shelter, which was locked. Somebody found the key. This was a building, it was built probably about 4 years ago, before. And of course the shelter had never been used. People were very complacent after the Six-Day War. And we got into the shelter. I don't know if anybody's ever been into a shelter. Like just a huge room made of concrete floor, dust on the floor, horrible dank smell, no washroom, nowhere to sit, nothing. I mean, everyone was totally unprepared. Fortunately, we were only there for about half an hour, then an all clear sounded. I think it was probably just a test, and we came up, and David was just coming home from shul. Came in, and we put the TV on. Golda Meir was broadcasting, and had a piece of cake, a cup of tea. And as I'm putting the food for our meal on the table, I said to him, "Oh, well, they're not going to call you. You've only done 3 months basic training. They're not going to need you." And no sooner had the words got out of my mouth, a knock on the door, soldier standing there, report immediately to base. We bade a tearful farewell, and off he went. But somehow I was in denial. And all night long each time I heard a car approaching, I looked out the window. "Oh, I'm sure it's him, he's coming back." And I'm saying to myself, "Well, they're not going to need him. He's only done 3 months training." And you've heard what unit he was in, kind of a unit. He's not going to get any use to them. They're not going to need him. He's going to come back soon. But it got light, and the reality set in that he wasn't coming home. And the most terrible, cold fear clutched at my heart.
Well, I felt much the same. You know, I just sat down to have a piece of cake and a cup of tea, and knock on the door. I open the door, and there's a man in army uniform with a piece of paper with red printing. Red printing is a very bad sign. Red print is what's called a tzav shmona. It's an emergency call-up. So, fine. I pack a bag very quickly, and told to report to the assembly point, which was on the other side of Petach Tikva. We lived in Petach Tikva. Complete blackout. So, took the car, only driving inside lights. Reported to the assembly point, received clothing, weapons, no ammunition. And from there we were loaded into buses and we were driven to Lod Airport. Got to Lod Airport, the idea was that we would be flown into Sinai, and this is not as simple as it sounds because the Egyptians were still launching hit-and-run raids over Sinai, and there were no planes. The only planes which were coming in were bringing the wounded. And there were some nasty scenes at the airport as well because people were trying to get out of the country. There was nothing that we could do. We had to wait. So we walked to a nearby field and we slept out in the field that night. Round about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they finally found a plane for us, and we boarded this ancient Dakota, which flew us down to Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, my unit was tasked with defending the airfield. Just to explain what the significance of Sharm el-Sheikh at this point, the Egyptians, when they launched their attack, they crossed the canal. The idea being that I have to back off a little bit. The Israeli defense line was based on 18 fixed positions, between which the Israelis had built a sand embankment, which was considered to be impassable. The Israeli doctrine was that these 18 positions would stop the crossing of the canal. The Israeli armour, the tanks and so on, were 2 miles back from the canal so that they couldn't be hit by artillery. And the theory was that if the Egyptians did launch, these tanks would then move forward. At the same time, the Israeli aircraft would dominate the canal and take out anything that the tanks couldn't handle. That was the theory. Nobody dreamt for a moment that the Egyptians could also think. And the Egyptians did a number of things which were totally unexpected. First of all, they turned water hoses on the sand embankments. That caused the embankment to collapse, and they could then cross at points other than in front of the fixed positions. The second mistake was that when the Israeli armour moved forward, every third Egyptian soldier was equipped with an anti-tank rocket. And they decimated the tank. Most of the casualties were in those tankistas that came forward. There was also a design fault in the tank. It was a new American tank, and the hydraulic fluid which rotated the turret was very inflammable. These rockets, when they hit, created a tremendous amount of heat, and the tanks turned into incinerators. That was the design fault in the tank. The next mistake, the Egyptians had moved anti-aircraft missiles all the way down the west bank of the canal, and they dominated the airspace into 10 miles inland, which stopped the Israeli aircraft from attacking. Plane after plane was just shot down when they attempted to attack. So the Egyptians made a successful crossing of the canal. Now, these red lines are the roads. There are actually 3 road systems across Sinai. There's the northern coastal road, which is a very bad road, bad surface, narrow, easy to dominate. The main road is the road which runs through the center of Sinai to the airbase at Refidim and through the Middle Pass to Suez. The third road is the one which runs round the coast here via Sham. When the Egyptians launched their first attack, they were wildly successful, more than they expected, and they stopped, they hesitated. When we arrived in Sham on Motzei Yom Kippur, as part of their initial attack, they had done over the airfield in Sham. There was an airfield here. Again, to give you an example of how unprepared Israel was, the airfield here at Sham was defended by Hawk anti-aircraft missiles. It's an American missile, radar directed. The Egyptians had launched their initial attack with 2 types of aircraft, fighters and fighter bombers. The way that air defense was supposed to work was that the radar would switch on at the airfield, would detect the attacking planes, and that would then that radar would then direct the missiles to the planes. The Egyptians were well aware of this, and they deliberately sent one single bomber slowly across the airfield. As soon as Israel switched on the radar, they launched a radar-guided missile, a radar-detecting missile, which travelled down the radar beam and destroyed the command post. And those were probably amongst the first Israeli casualties of the war, including 2 Chayalot. As soon as that command post was destroyed, the anti-aircraft missiles became useless, and the Egyptians then destroyed the airfield. Once the remaining soldiers on the airfield realised that they were undefended, they rushed to the armory to pull out the anti-aircraft weapons that they did have. Only to discover that the officer in charge of the armory had gone home for Yom Kippur and taken the keys with him. So they had to shoot off the lock, pull them out. There were a lot of casualties on the airfield. The Egyptians did make one mistake, which I just mentioned. At that time, it was a great military secret. The way an aerial bomb works is that when you load a bomb onto a plane, you don't load it live, because as the plane takes off or it vibrates, it can set off the bomb. So what happens is in the tail of an aerial bomb, there is a vent, and as the bomb falls, air rushes into that vent, and inside is a small propeller. That propeller's on a shaft, and as it rotates, it drives the shaft down, that breaks the wire and fuses the bomb. The bomb is now live. When the Egyptians attacked the airfield, they came in too low. And when they released their bombs, the propeller did not go through enough rotations to fuse the bomb. So instead of making a huge crater in the runway, they just made holes, which were quickly repaired, and the airfield was back in service within 24 hours. That was a very significant mistake, as it turned out later. We'll see. Anyway, when we got to Sham, we got there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were assembled. Our commanding officer gave us a speech, which said, you probably have less than 48 hours to live. The Egyptians are coming down the coast. They have also, there was an Egyptian naval base here at Ardaka. for which they were sending ships across to land off the coast. They'd also brought helicopters in to land paratroops along the coast. They were expected to arrive in Sharm with several brigades of at least 5,000 men. We were 120 men with an average of 20 rounds of ammunition. You do the calculation, 2,400 rounds. We would have to kill 2 Egyptians with each bullet and another 200 with our bare hands. Well, it wasn't going to happen. The commanding officer said, we have to hold this as long as possible. The only way you'll leave here is on the Lunka. Stretcher. But it's very important that we hold out as long as possible, which will give Israel time to mobilize the reserves, bring more people, try and defend further back. Following that speech, we given up the ammunition, 20 rounds. I carried a rifle, which I'll explain further later on. And we went out to our Dot and we dug in.
So after he went off, spent. I'm not sure if I mentioned also that in addition to my 2 kids, I was 8 months pregnant. Yeah, but okay. Anyway, spent 2 sleepless nights. You have to remember this was a time there were no cell phones, there was no email. You didn't know, where he was or what was happening. There was tremendous tension. The news was only bad that was coming in from the radio, and the radio was on, from morning till night. The children kept asking, when's Abba coming home, and had to keep things calm for them. I was totally exhausted, and finally, I think the Tuesday night, I fell into a deep, deep sleep, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, the air raid siren went off again. Thought, this time it's for real, and we rushed down, creaked down with my 2 kids. I was prepared this time now. Got a bag with snacks and drinks and diapers, and schlepped the bag and the kids and the double stroller, and creaked down the stairs. You can't use an elevator. And spent another couple of hours in the shelter. Nothing happened, thank God. It was just. It was very miserable, very, everybody was unsure, nobody knew what was happening. The nights there was blackout. The civil guard would come out, as soon as it got dark, the civil guard would come round and say, oh, somebody's got their blinds open. You could see a bit of light, and had to close the lights. The streets were black, there were no street lights, and the cars had to drive without headlights. The shops were already beginning to run out of staples. People were stocking up on cans and candles and oil and all those kind of things. My in-laws were supposed to be arriving the day after Yom Kippur, but there were no flights in or out of the country, and there were no phones, so I just assumed they weren't coming. Anyway, I'm not sure, Tuesday or the Wednesday morning, Erev Sukkot, phone rings about 6:30 in the morning, and it's my father-in-law. He said, oh, I've just arrived in Netanya, sorry to call you so early, but I wanted to catch David before he goes to work. I said, David's not here. Oh, he's not there, where is he? Well, actually, he's been called up. He's been called up? Oy, what am I going to tell Mummy? Anyway, I was very relieved they were in the country. They were in Netanya. My father-in-law both of them, they were working on some projects, so they weren't staying with us, but at least I was able to go there for the first couple of days of Sukkot. And let David continue.
Okay, we dug in. We had a hole in the ground which was about 2 meters wide, about 3 meters long, and about 1.5 meters deep. In this hole in the ground, we had one Browning .3-inch machine gun with about 1,000 rounds of ammunition, which is enough for about 70-80 seconds of sustained fire. 4 of us, Carl, who was the a motor mechanic, he was the machine gunner. Gidon, who was a lecturer in biology at Tel Aviv University, he was the assistant to the machine gunner. Alan, who was a friend of mine, whom we'd gone to school together, we'd gone to live in Petah Tikva together, worked in the same company, ended up in the same under. Alan was an economist with an Uzi, and myself with a rifle. The rifle, okay. My personal weapon was a rifle. It turned out in the basic training, through no fault of my own, I was a good shot. So you get a rifle. This rifle is about as tall as I am. It's called a Tschechi. It's a Czech-made German Mauser hunting rifle. It's a truly murderous weapon. Had a recoil. It's a bolt-action rifle because you don't use automatic weapons to snipe. That's only in the movies. It had a kick like a horse. If you didn't hold it properly, it would break your jaw when you fired it, or break your shoulder. At 100 meters, it would go through the concrete wall of the house. If you hit anything at 200 meters, it didn't matter where you hit an individual, you would kill them, because the velocity of the bullet was such that if, let's say, if it hit a person in the arm, it would simply tear the arm off the body. And anything else, it sets up a hydraulic shockwave inside the body, which would kill the person instantly. Had a killing range of about 1.2 kilometers, which was great because I didn't want to get any closer. It was a pretty vicious weapon. So that was my weapon, the rifle. The rifle goes with you everywhere, 24/7. You sleep with it, you go to the toilet with it, you go to bed with it, whatever. The rifle stays with you. First night, of course, we were paralyzed with fear. We'd been told that we only had 48 hours. Our position was on the southwest corner of the airfield, about 200 meters back from the entrance to a gully which ran down to a beach, which would have been an actual landing point for any amphibious landing. We were to cover that. We had about half a dozen grenades. We had a rocket grenade. We had a 21mm mortar, which we'd never been trained on. And we waited, pitch black. Waited all night. Of course, every movement, every sound. This is it. We're going to die. And we waited and we waited, and nothing happened. Came the dawn. Stay in the hole in the ground, and that's where we are. A truck arrives with 20 eggs. Brings 20 eggs for food. And every single day we were there, they brought 20 eggs. We could never understand. We used to later on we started screaming at them, what are we supposed to do with all these eggs? I mean, there's only 4 of us. Every day, 20 eggs. And boy, you can go mad. No water, no running water of any sort. The water supply to the base has been destroyed, so of course no showers, no toilets, nothing. If you needed to do what you needed to do, you went out into the desert and you did what you needed to do. If you were on an ambush, which we were because we were in a fixed position in an ambush, you have what's called a shoshana. You have 5 people usually who lie like this, head out, foot in. Head out, foot in a semicircle. You have your right leg over the other guy's left leg. Because you can't say anything, you can't move, you can't do anything. The rule in an ambush is very simple. He who shoots first lives. So you don't make any sounds, you just lie there all night, and if you have to do anything, you just do it where you're lying. Occasionally you go through that as well. what I'm trying to get over here to some extent is that the army is another planet. You can forget everything you ever heard about the relationships between people. You can forget everything you've ever heard about people being polite or people being civilized or being... it's a different world. You get down to basics in the army, real basics. Anyway, we were there for the first day, second day, third day, living in this hole in the ground. But there were peculiar sides to it. For instance, you're listening to one of the very few people who's probably ever been court-martialed for building a sukkah. We wanted to have a sukkah. Now, in Sinai, there aren't trees, there aren't bushes, there's nothing except sand and rock. We wanted to have a sukkah, so we would scrounge around. Sorry, I should explain that. When it got light during the day, you could move around. So we wanted to have a sukkah. And the problem was that the Egyptians had an airfield at Fayid. Fayid is here, just across the other side of the canal. And every time they sent up a plane, it's about 2 minutes flying time from Sham, so every time they sent up a plane, there was an air raid warning. And you're supposed to take cover. So every 2 minutes there's an air raid warning, you're supposed to take cover. And we wanted to go to the sukkah, so we go, no, we can't. So we ignored the air raid warning. And so, of course, the sergeant, we had two sergeants, as they said, one to read and one to write. The sergeant said, you know, if you don't get in the emplacement, if you don't get into the shelters, we'll court-martial you. I said, court-martial me? What do I get? I'm going to be dead in 48 hours anyway. You're going to court-martial me. So we got court-martialed. After the war, that was. Actually, to finish the story, we got court-martialed, so we went in front of a colonel. The colonel hears the story, and he turns to the sergeant, and he says, do you really want to do this? And the sergeant says, get up. So I'll go into the first night of Sukkot. Now, on the first night of Sukkot, which was the Wednesday night, the Egyptians had hesitated for 3 days. They'd been successful. They were afraid to move out from under cover of the missile cover. On Sukkot night, they decided to try a breakout. And of course, where did they decide to try the breakout? They decided to try the breakout from Suez down this road. There were strategic reasons for this. Firstly, by coming down this road, they could get to the oil-producing area around Abu Rodeas, which is where the Egyptians had oil. Secondly, if they could break out here, they would have immediately got behind the Israeli lines. If they could get as far as Sham itself, they would have the airfield, and that would force a complete Israeli withdrawal from Sinai, because they could interdict all the supply lines. Sukkot night, the first night, they decided they were going to try. They again launched helicopter raids across from the west bank of the approaches to Suez, and this is where the naval base at Ardaka came into play. The Egyptians had a naval base here at Ardaka, in which they'd assembled a fleet protected by a number of Russian patrol boats that they bought. And the idea was that as the army would advance down here, the paratroops would seize positions along the road, and the navy would arrive at the same time as the army off Sham. The Israeli intelligence had been made aware of that, and we were already told on Sukkot afternoon, Erev Sukkot afternoon, that things are going to start. The Egyptians tried to start their breakout. The first thing they did was they launched a number of ground-to-ground missiles. They used a missile called the Frog, which is a fairly short-range ballistic missile. And that was the first time we actually came under fire. There's nothing you can do about these things. You just watch and you see this yellow light travelling across the sky towards you. Every anti-aircraft gun opens up immediately and the planes take off. The Sham had a squadron of F-4 Phantoms and a squadron of Skyhawks. trying to hit these missiles or bring them down. 2 landed fairly close to Sharm. Massive explosion, lit up the entire sky. It's just, you can't describe the strength of the explosion. One was hit in midair. They missed anyway. Baruch Hashem, they missed. We, having built our sukkah, we decided we still want to have a minyan. We managed to round up a minyan. There weren't many Dutty people in my my company. We managed to round up a minyan, and we found an undamaged hut. And it was very interesting because when you walked in, obviously you're not going to daven with your weapon and the rest of it. So the stuff was dumped at the back of the hut. So when we walked out, you had a group of men walking out, and the whole of the rear half of the hut was just mortars and pistols and machine guns and grenades and rocket launchers and I don't know what. It's an amazing sight, not your typical shore. That also is the first time in my life that I have driven on Yom Tov, because we knew that the Egyptians, or there were reports that the Egyptians had landed troops all along the coast, paratroops maybe. It was dark. There was no way you could walk to the positions. You had to be driven there, and it's Yom Tov. Yom Tov. And it's a very, very strange feeling to, in Yom Kippur, you get into the truck or the jeep and you're taken there. They never came. The breakout failed. The Israeli Air Force had detected the boats at Ardaka and they had bombed them. They'd also sent in a number of frogmen who'd sabotaged the patrol boats. The helicopters which were supposed to land troops along the coast were fired upon and driven off. And Sukkot. First day Cholamot Sukkot, they installed a phone. This was the first time there was a phone. And of course, I had no idea what was happening with Ruth. The Israeli radio was broadcasting births. Anytime a woman had a baby, they would broadcast it so that maybe the soldiers would hear, the father would hear if he was in the army. Now, I had a transistor, which was totally banned. I mean, I'd have gone to prison for 10,000 years if they'd have found a transistor on me. Of course, it makes a noise. But the guys in the unit knew that I was expecting a child, so I would tap this transistor in. At night, when you went out to the Emdot or you went out to the ambush, you were checked to make sure you had nothing shiny, you had nothing that would make a noise. And what do you do with the transistor? So usually half a dozen men line up, 6, 7, 8 men line up. Sergeant walks down the front and checks them one by one. So I stand at one end for the inspection, and I got the transistor in my hand here. And the sergeant checks me over. Meanwhile, I've passed the transistor to this guy. The sergeant checks me over, fine, he moves on to the next guy. So the second guy passes the transistor on to the third guy. The second guy gets checked out. When the transistor gets to that end, as the sergeant goes to that end, the transistor comes back again. Anyway, they installed the phone, and we could finally phone home. But of course, everybody I mean, this was, the phone in Sharm was about the only phone for the entire area. And there were hundreds of people who wanted to phone home. I mean, people, their wives didn't know we were alive, we dead, or what. And you had to queue for hours for this phone. And I knew Ruth was staying with my parents in Netanya, so finally it's my turn. And I phone through, and some woman picks up the phone. And I say, I want to speak to Ruth Cymerman, please. And she says, who is it? I said, it's her husband. And this woman starts, she said, oh, hello, I'm Mrs. Whatever her name was. You may remember me from London, I'm a friend of your parents. And I said, get off the phone. And she'll never forget me for that. I met her years after. She'll never forget me. How can you be so... Another thing I always remember, I'll mention it in this Chotam, there were 4 Lubavitchers came down to Sinai on Chol Hamoed with Arba Minim. And they went to every single base in Sinai with the Arba Minim so that people could make the bracha on the Arba Minim. They left their families, they came down, they went to every single base in Sinai. To this day, I always sell my chametz at the Babish, just because of that. As a Hakaras HaTov, I've never forgotten it. It was amazing that they did that. The days passed, nothing special happened. Arik Sharon launched his famous attack. Again, Lizkuto, I'm standing here because of Arik Sharon. If he had failed, he'd be Haftarot. He got round, he crossed the canal, just briefly to explain the background. The Egyptians had two armies which they'd sent across the canal. The third army had the southern section, the second army had the northern section. They did not communicate well with each other, and Arik Sharon discovered a gap between them. Launched an attack through the gap, turned south, and rolled up the Egyptian protection along the West Bank, including, most importantly, the rocket sites. That opened a gap for the aircraft, and that was the end. The Egyptian army eventually became completely surrounded, and Sharon started northwards, and they were going to surround the second army as well. At that point, the Egyptians capitulated 17 days in, and there was a ceasefire, and that was it. Just one other thing I want to mention also, this time, the Americans started to resupply us. We had started the war with equipment that was so outdated, it's unbelievable. I'll give you an example. The Russians had modern tanks. I as a rifleman, had what's called a rifle grenade. The way a rifle grenade works is that normally when you fire a bullet, you have a cartridge and a bullet. The cartridge is full of gunpowder. When you pull the trigger, a pin hits the cartridge, the gunpowder forms a gas, and that throws the bullet down the barrel. For a rifle grenade, you stick the grenade in the end of the rifle, and you just use a cartridge, no bullet. So when you fire the cartridge, the gas throws the rifle grenade out the end of the rifle, and that is supposed to hit the tank. Now, you don't hold the rifle here because, first of all, the recoil will kill you because you use an oversized cartridge. Secondly, the grenade, you don't fire it in a straight line, you fire it in a loop like that. You're supposed to put the butt of the rifle on the ground, not between your legs. I say that jokingly, but I know somebody who suffered a severe accident because of that. I mean that literally. You put the butt on the ground and you fire this thing. It has a range of 40 meters. You'd have to be out of your mind to take this pop gun against the modern tank. You know, when you shoot at people, they get irritable, they shoot back. And the tank's got a cannon, machine gun. You can cover 40 meters in about 5 seconds. You have to be absolutely crazy to use a rifle grenade. But that's what we were supposed to use. Oh yeah, and you're supposed to stand there and reload if you miss. Sure, I said to the officer, you do it. By the end of the war, though, the Americans had resupplied us, and they resupplied us with what's called a LAW, light anti-tank weapon. It's a tube about this long, about this thick. You pull it open, the sights pop up, there is a rocket inside, you just aim and fire. It's a terrific thing. And we were dying to use this. But by the time the ceasefire happened, we'd been equipped, and so they decided that we could test fire one